Fin the Week is brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services industry.
Hi there and welcome to another episode of Fin the Week. I'm Amelia.
I'm Paul.
I'm Russell.
I'm Pat.
I'm Alistair.
Welcome everybody. How are we all?
Very well. Sun is shining.
Yeah,
good
Yeah,
thanks.
good, thanks.
Alistair, first time on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you. And obviously we'll chat more as we head through. Today we're going to be addressing some of the hype around the topic of AI. There's a lot of chatter about AI coming for jobs, automating things, and just generally taking over. And we're going to dig into why it's perhaps not that simple. Before we get into that, though, Pat, I hear you recently cancelled your ChatGPT subscription. Why is that? Was it politically motivated? Is there something better? What's going on?
Well, I didn't cancel it, so I still use it for some things. But I think the main thing I've switched is I've started using Claude as my go-to day-to-day chat agent. I've been using Claude Code for ages as my main sort of coding partner, and it is really powerful. And I've just found that recently the main Claude chat tool has become a lot more powerful as well. The answers it gives are much more rounded, better cited. It's much better at producing diagrams, and for business use, it's just so much better. And I actually posted this on LinkedIn with the kind of headline "Farewell ChatGPT." So I've been using ChatGPT since it was literally the day it was released. That's my kind of go-to. And actually, I just realized a few weeks ago that Claude's just better. It's become along so quickly over the last few months. And from a business perspective, it really is just absolutely brilliant. And we'll be rolling out Claude subscription. I mean, our whole team's using Claude now, and we'll be giving everyone kind of Claude Max subscriptions at some point soon as well, because it is just so transformative. It's funny, at the end of that post, I put a little sort of throwaway line. I can't remember exactly what it was, something along the lines of, and the fact that Anthropic resisted the Pentagon's requests to use Claude for autonomous killing drones and mass surveillance was a tick in the box for Indulge. It's sort of a slightly ironic, sarcastic comment. And I think that sentence alone just kind of made the post go absolutely mental, because that was kind of all over the news at the time. And I didn't mean for it to be political, but it kind of became political. And there was quite a lot of interesting debate, so I call it, on the post. You know, you had like right-wing people and left-wing people going. And I tried to sort of stay, I tried to keep politics out of my LinkedIn. So I tried to sort of give a fairly balanced response to each of those viewpoints. But actually I wasn't expecting it to do so well, but it's my most popular LinkedIn post by quite a long way, like 25,000 impressions, hundreds of likes, like tens, maybe 40, 50 comments, maybe even more. It keeps on going as well. So it really tapped into something. And I think there's a real kind of boycott ChatGPT movement going on at the moment as well, because when Anthropic refused the Pentagon, OpenAI welcomed them with open arms, and OpenAI put in some clauses around restricting the use of their tools for these horrible kind of Orwellian purposes. But actually they put a clause in there as well saying, well, as long as you use our tools in line with the law, then it's fine. And the law currently prohibits that stuff. But who's to say that the current administration wouldn't just change the law to allow it? So I think the law is kind of pretty fluid these days, isn't it? It's an interesting one. But yeah, the main driver behind me moving personally, and also kind of moving the business towards Claude, is that for business, it's just so unbelievably powerful. It doesn't generate images or videos, but it does everything else really well. Document summarization, document production, hooking data out of different sources, crunching it all together, producing reports, producing proposals, writing code, that day-to-day boring business admin stuff. It's just really good at. And actually for image generation, we're kind of using Gemini quite a lot. Gemini Nano Banana is, yeah.
I was going to say I found myself, because I didn't really follow the whole political debate around OpenAI and Anthropic, but I just naturally found myself over the last couple of months using ChatGPT less, and I've been using Gemini for my day-to-day, just general questions I need answers to and research and stuff like that. And then I've used Claude when I need to like actually do some work. And I can't really put my finger on exactly why. It's not like I've sat there and figured out which one gives me the best responses. I've just kind of felt that's the right move. Be interesting to see if, because I still get the sense that a lot of people see ChatGPT as the go-to default AI tool. Whether that will remain, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think I talked about enshittification a little bit in my posts. And whenever I mention enshittification online, you always get a few people who are like, what's that term? And they look into it and they're like, absolutely love that term. But enshittification, for those of you who don't understand what it is it's a fairly recent term that's come about to describe the life cycle of big tech. And that life cycle is that the big tech will launch a product that's incredible and completely free of charge, that disrupts a whole industry, takes on, gains millions of users and becomes a core part of people's lives. Facebook, for example, if you think back to 2006, Facebook launches, it's a complete revolution. It annihilates MySpace. People love it. It's so cool. Like, you can catch up with your friends, you can poke your friends, you can chat to them. And then they introduce the feed, and suddenly you can see what your friends are up to. And it's just a brilliant platform. And then the first step has been but not financially viable, right? They're spending millions on hosting every month, keeping this thing running, but they're not making any money out of it at all. So they've got loads of investment. The investors are starting to say, all right, when are you actually going to start making money out of this? They introduce advertising, and firstly, their first attempt at advertising is very lean. They promise that it won't affect the user experience, and then it is very lean. It comes in, and suddenly they're making millions out of advertising because they've got all this incredible user data, and they can target these amazing ads. And then their share price goes up. They get more investors. The investors are saying, well, where's the profit going to come from next quarter? As they start to inject more ads in, they become more prevalent. And then they start to think about, well, how can we get more money from advertising? We need to get more people on the platform for longer. So they start to tweak the feed to make it more addictive. And as a result, you see less of the stuff your friends are up to and more addictive slop. And suddenly this enshittification process starts, and you're kind of drawn into this platform because it's addictive, and you just want to see the next cat video or the next whatever. And surrounding all of that feed is loads of ads and everything. And, Facebook are absolutely making tons of money out of, or Meta making tons of money out of your attention. And the platform gradually erodes. And then the next phase of enshittification is you have your end users, you have your businesses that are selling loads of stuff on Facebook and doing really well. And then you have Meta, who's making loads of money out of this. The users are so dependent on Facebook, they don't know where to go. Suddenly you've got this community of business users that are really dependent on Facebook in order to keep their businesses running. So what happens is, in order to extract more profit from their platform, they start to reduce it, reduce the experience for business users. They put up the costs, they put up hurdles, they make it harder to advertise. Suddenly these business users are starting to get squeezed. In the example of Amazon, in addition to increasing their advertising costs, Amazon will actually take the most successful product sold on there and start making their own. So they plagiarize the products and start selling those on Amazon as well in order to increase their own margin. And in the end, you just have this platform that's just utterly rubbish for end users, rubbish for business users. It's horrible to use. Like the tech platform behind that site is just worth billions and billions, and there's this kind of global superpower. But it's a life cycle, right? And at some point, people will start to leave that platform because another disruptor will come in at the beginning and disrupt them and start the whole cycle again. I'd say, like, there's three really interesting case studies: Amazon, Uber, and Meta, in terms of platforms that have just been enshittified to the point of being awful to use. And they're all so powerful, and they've cornered the market so much that they're quite difficult to move away from. I've tried to move away from Amazon a few times. It's just impossible. I successfully stopped using Facebook. just because it's just awful and I don't miss it. But I'm heavily reliant on WhatsApp. I couldn't get WhatsApp out of my life. That's a Meta product. Um, Fortunately, we don't have Uber in Guernsey, so I've never had to come to rely on it. I'm sure if I lived in London, I'd use Uber a lot. So yeah, that's the process of certification. OpenAI are the first AI firm to start introducing ads into their chat tool, because they don't have the huge mountains of cash that Google have, Microsoft have. And it's received quite a lot of negative publicity. And it is the first step towards certification. They're trying to monetize their platform. But what they're missing is that in order for certifications to succeed, you need to have your users locked in. There can't be an alternative. And with ChatGPT, there are 4 or 5 really good alternatives, and you can just switch to them straight away. So as soon as people start seeing ads on OpenAI, they're going to go to Claude, they're going to go to Gemini. All these other platforms have assured everyone that ads aren't going to appear in their platforms. So yeah, I think OpenAI are certainly going to be facing some challenges over the next year or two. They're hemorrhaging a lot of money, training models, hosting models. They're nowhere near breaking even. So yeah, I'll have to see where the tide takes them, really.
That's interesting. I think we could do a whole episode on this probably, and I'm sure maybe this is stuff that we'll touch on in future episodes. But for now, let's move on to our main kind of topic of discussion for today. So AI can do amazing things. It can automate complex tasks. It can write code and produce documents. But there's something we want to discuss today, and that is if the data going into a system is bad, the results are bad. So to start with, what do we mean by bad data?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the question. I don't want to hog this episode, so I'll kind of introduce him and I'll hand over to Alistair. I mean, AI is no different to any other IT system. An IT system takes data in one end and it crunches that data and spits it out at the other end. AI does that as well. And with any IT system, if the data going into that system is crap, then the data coming out the other end is crap. So an example might be if you run an e-commerce firm and you want to send out email marketing, you want to send out offers to your customer base via email marketing. If your mailing list is in really bad shape, you're not going to get many sales from that mailing list. If you're not obtaining the correct permissions in order to market to people, and then you send out an email to that mailing list, loads of people will mark you as spam, and your account will be flagged or shut down. If you're not properly capturing customer emails and you're not properly segmenting them, then it's difficult to send the right messages to the right people, and so you're not going to get good conversion rates. If you've got a really good mailing list and you've got each customer in that mailing list has clear information as to what they're interested in, what they want to hear about, every customer's got a recorded permission that allows you to market to them, then when you send out those mails, you can really target users more accurately. They're expecting those emails from you, and your conversion rates will go up a lot. So that's an example of like good data versus bad data. In AI, if you imagine, trying to think of a scenario, imagine you've got a system where you're trying to crunch through all of your client records, looking for opportunities to upsell new services to your clients, right? If you have a CRM and all of your client data is well structured and well ordered in that CRM, and you've got records of what each client has purchased, how much they've spent over the last year, what services they're interested in, then you can point an AI at that CRM. The AI can work its way through it and really efficiently pull out a list of clients and what potential cross-sell, upsell opportunities there might be. And it'll be really accurate and really well refined. If you don't have a CRM and all you've got is like a client's folder with like thousands of unstructured folders and Word documents and PowerPoint presentations and PDFs and emails, you can try and point your AI at that and it will have a go, but it will take ages and the results will be inaccurate, like missing gaps. It will really struggle with that task. So that's an example of bad data versus good data. I think to get the most out of AI, a lot of the time you have to really sort the structure of your data out first. And if you're a well-run business with the right software stack, and with your data in good shape, then you're going to be able to accelerate everything you do using AI.
Am I right in thinking that because one of the things I'm interested in with this topic is AI has a lot of power to s- scale processes, and so the way I think of it is like it's like you've got a fan and you could spray perfume into that fan and the perfume spreads and everything smells nice, but equally you could throw some mud at it and the mud spreads everywhere. And is AI a bit like the fan, where if you've got like loads of data but there's maybe one crucial mistake in that data set and you give it to AI will basically run at 100 miles an hour with that mistake and compound it. And is that a significant risk, especially in financial services where, you might be using AI to create, I don't know, to assess loan offers and figure out insurance risk and stuff like that? I mean, that must be a massive headache for firms.
Yeah, definitely. What are your views on that, Alistair?
Yeah, I think I think there's a few things. So you've got the data, which I think whether you're using AI or you weren't using AI, whether the data is up to scratch or not is going to be a significant issue. I think other issues are you've got to be as specific as you can, and you've got to really know what you're trying to achieve and tell the AI that, to create a way of working with it where you're managing the AI rather than just assuming it knows all this stuff and can figure it out for you. And in my own experience, you're sort of losing that sort of step-by-step processing time when you might clarify your thoughts. Normally, you've got to have them clarified at the start. If you imagine, going somewhere, going on a journey somewhere, you've not got the time to sort of think about where we're going to go because it's instant. So you've got to have all that planned ahead. And I think AI, as well as the whole, is your data correct? It's a bit too easy for people maybe to not fully think everything through because it will kind of fill in the gaps and may or may not work. And also, the people can almost fall into a trap of thinking it's some sort of omnipotent being that will somehow figure it out, rather than realizing it's a tool. I mean, I've been trying to get into the mindset of just thinking of it as you would, like a crane or a digger or something that could do superhuman feats, but you don't sort of worship it and say, what shall we do next, crane? You just realize that, well, I've got to figure all that out myself. And I think AI can almost let people cut corners a bit or assume things will work out when they would never have worked out. So it's just making sure you're not sort of cutting those corners, or you're not accepting the hallucinations from bad data as, oh, well, that's what AI said, in a way that you would never accept that, or you wouldn't be able to if you're doing the process manually.
I like to sometimes frame AI as a psychotic polymath, in that it's kind of better than me at most, better than me at largely everything, including coding. And I've been coding for 25 years. That's quite a frightening statement in itself. But it genuinely doesn't care about what comes out. It's got zero empathy. It's got no context of what the real world is. It's got no conscience. So it genuinely doesn't care if something's right or wrong. It just produces what it thinks. So you need to kind of, if you frame it in that way, then it encourages you to just validate everything that it's producing. And like you say, Alistair, manage it in a fairly close fashion in order to checking it at every stage and validating at every stage to ensure that it is producing exactly what you want and ensure the output is accurate. And I've found in my workflow as a developer and actually in many other areas where we're using AI is that the process of building an app has changed a lot, from planning out the app and then spending a long time writing the code and then testing the code as you go, and then doing some tests at the end, to kind of planning out the app, getting Claude to build the app in kind of almost no time at all, and then spending loads and loads of time just testing and validating and checking. And I've found that, like, whilst the build step of that software has kind of collapsed down to a fraction of what it used to be, the overall effort required to build a decent bit of software is still, I don't know, it takes less time, but it's not like a tenth of the time. It's still looking at like 50 or 60% of the time it used to take. But 90% of that time is like checking and validating and testing everything that it does. And every time you check and test and validate it, there's always something wrong. So that if ever you have it write some code and you're tempted to put it into production without testing that code, there will be something wrong with it. So it's certainly not a kind of sort of software development panacea just yet. And it's the way we're using it, it's definitely saving time and making things a lot easier. But it's you can't be lazy and not check it.
I actually find that coding with it is becoming more intense for me because I am having to think further ahead. I am having to think of more scenarios and more test cases. I am having to envisage how everything affects the final product because it then instantly builds it, which is sort of shorter bursts of much more intense thinking rather than spending the afternoon just coding up something and then moving on to the next bit where what you're building is smaller and you're working at a slower pace so you can swap things out and update it as you go. So yeah, like you said, it's not sort of instant and it's not sort of easy. It's just taken away the tedious bits and compressed it down and sort of made it all a bit more intense and focused on the whole product, really.
I think a good analogy is if you are like a micromanager control freak managing a team of 5 or 6 developers, and you have to check every single bit of code and test every single bit of functionality that your team develop before you're happy to release that. And as a developer, your team is these Claude agents. Sometimes I'll be running 3, 4, 5 agents all at once doing different things. And I have to look at the output of all of those agents and test them and validate them. So I'm effectively taking on the role of this like micromanager, managing this team of agents and like reviewing all the code that comes out of these agents. So suddenly you've got this like intensity. So I would definitely resonate with that. Because you're like, I've got to like get my head around every single bit of functionality here and test it and figure out what it should do so that I can tell whether it's failing. And it's definitely a different mentality for sure. It's more like a manager mentality rather than a technical mentality.
Does AI change the game in terms of if you're, say, to use an example, a mortgage lender, and you're assessing applications, and you built a system before the days of AI where it would kind of let someone log in, manage the applications, review them, process them, come up with a decision. And then you want to introduce AI into that so that it can do some of the heavy lifting, maybe automate the assessments, come up with answers, pick out edge cases. Does the requirement for how you organize the data change, or does it remain the same? You have to have clean data coming in? Because to me, it probably ups the ante because you're handing over more control. Therefore, companies who might have been, for want of a better word, slightly lazy with how they manage data now have to be really, really hot on it.
Definitely. Yeah, you'll need, if you're getting AI to assess scenarios like that where a yes or no decision on a mortgage could genuinely impact someone's life, do you need a complete full audit trail? And if you're getting AI to make those decisions, you need to understand why the AI has made that decision as well, because the user has a right to an explanation of your decision under GDPR. And if you're just going to an AI and saying, do I lend the money to this person or not? And the AI says, no, that's not, you can't go to the user and say, oh, the AI said no. You need to go to the user and say, we've said no because we've assessed this and that, and your income isn't high enough to cover the mortgage, and you defaulted on another mortgage 3 years ago. And we've used AI to sort of validate this, but you need to be able to give that proper feedback to the user. And I think, right now you might have a process where they document the decision, but some of those decisions might happen in the form of a conversation, and they might be like just in someone's mind. And if a customer comes up and says, can you give me a reason for this decision? You might have to dig out that person and ask them why they made that decision. And you could probably get away with being a little bit lazy and not having everything specifically written down in that respect, even though you should do as a mortgage lender. But if you rely, the more you rely on AI, the more bulletproof your data needs to be. 100%.
It ties back slightly to something I think we touched on in a previous episode, where it was to do with that Hannah Fry documentary series, and she was looking at health insurance in the US, and I forget the specifics of it, but basically the AI was making decisions on certain things, and it was relying on spotting patterns in a huge data set. And it was spotting patterns that probably no human would be able to do themselves. And even knowing that it's spotting patterns doesn't mean you know which patterns it's spotting. It's just coming up with decisions based on what it's got available to it. And I was reading about something while we were preparing for this episode, and it said one of the challenges with this type of thing as well is you might build a system that is trained on previous customer data. So if we go back to the mortgage example, you could take your current customer database, throw in all of the information, throw in all of the decisions that were made, and the AI system will learn patterns, which it will then apply to future scenarios. But the challenge with that is that so right now we've got the kind of rising energy prices because of conflicts around the world. So it would be making decisions based on that context in the future when that might not apply. How do, I mean, I don't know really what the question is, but how do firms kind of manage that whole thing? Because you think to yourself, I could build this really advanced system where AI is trained and it's making decisions, but is it all useless? Because in a few months' time, the world's different, and what it knows might actually be a flaw because it's learned a pattern that is no longer true.
Yeah. The way I see it as well is I think AI is really good at finding patterns and flagging where those kind of where those risks might be, or where those where those points kind of exist, where like various points exist. But I don't think it should be making decisions, like automated decisions, especially in a regulated space, because the kind of danger with not having that human validation or that human execution on what AI has found is that it could be wrong. And I think what we've been saying about AI doesn't have any empathy, or even worse, it tries to please. And I think in a space, you can imagine it in perhaps in the banking space where, let's say you kind of let it automate enforcing, like overdrawn accounts, like kind of fines on like overdrawn accounts, wouldn't have any empathy in that process at all. It probably wouldn't be complying with consumer duty. It would probably just automate all of these fines to people. It might get some wrong, although it depends kind of how well it was trained. But if it went off and applied a load of, fines, or then you'd be not only at the risk of not complying with a consumer duty from a regulatory perspective, but also to customer loyalty as well, retention. So it could be really damaging to your brand. So perhaps it exists more as a kind of, not a end-to-end automation tool, but it does such a good job at crunching data and flagging various points. If you tell it what to find, then the process at the end needs to be that kind of human, like, validation of what it's found. But is that really solving the problem? Because it's still creating potentially a massive human overhead at the end to kind of go through and, it needs to be automated end to end, I think, to really make the most out of this technology.
Yeah, what we're talking about here is bias. And bias is like in certain applications, bias is a massive problem in AI, and in other applications, it's not a problem at all. Where it is a problem is where you have AI analyzing CVs or making decisions on mortgages or overdrafts, like you were talking about, Russell. Large language models are just trained on like the history of everything that humans have ever written. And most of that is like sexist, racist, xenophobic. All of these horrible human traits are all built into these models, and they're sort of balanced out at the point of training using a system called reinforced learning with human feedback, which makes them kind of on the surface neutral. for the most part, but actually these hidden biases are all over the place. And whenever I speak to clients about what they should use AI for, I say, use AI to summarize documents and to do proposals and crunch data where bias isn't an issue, like hook information out of invoices and, kind of stuff where that bias isn't a problem. Do not use it to filter out CVs. Like there's this huge rise recently, which I find utterly nauseating, of like AI avatars conducting job interviews. I don't know if you've seen that in the news. It's absolutely horrible. Imagine like you apply for a job and you click into the interview and there's a freaking AI avatar interviewing you. I mean, how like demeaning is that from a user experience? I definitely wouldn't want to work for that firm, but some people are so desperate for the job, so they go through the interview process. And I guess the first flaw is that you're going to turn off a lot of potential job applicants. The second flaw is this AI is like reading how you talk and how you appear, and it's analyzing you and determining whether you're a good fit for that job. Now, how can you guarantee that the AI isn't going to start weighting your application based on the color of your skin or your accent or your gender, or your haircut or the fact that you've got a lisp? Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't guarantee that. And for that, you just shouldn't be using AI for those kind of scenarios. And actually the EU AI Act, which has come into force recently or in the last year or so, I think it's in its final ratifications where it's partly enforced. I'm not entirely sure. But the EU AI Act designates that kind of AI as like super high risk. And so in the EU, you probably wouldn't find many companies doing this because it's actually illegal without huge amounts of onerous compliance and oversight. But in the US, it's a bit more of a wild west. So yeah, you kind of get this stuff happening all the time. So yeah, I think there's things where bias isn't a problem, and you can really transform your whole business without stressing about bias at all, as long as you're not using AI in an area where bias becomes a problem.
I wonder for anyone listening now, within their organisation, what might be the biggest technical hurdles that are facing, a typical organisation, bearing all of this in mind?
It's probably, I imagine it just be the sort of scale of or the number of questions and like we've just happened, you easily get drawn into what if scenarios and should it be doing this or that. I imagine that can be pretty off-putting just because they seem too difficult to answer or they seem too high risk. So rather than taking small steps, I mean, we've sort of been through that process over the last few years as developers with, going from ChatGPT to, where we are now, where it does the bulk of the work for us, and identifying where there are low risk, easy automations, changing your systems to make sure you're still approving the things that you need to approve and rolling it out, rather than sort of becoming frozen at the idea that it's either nothing at all or we're automating whether or not people can get mortgages. But I imagine that within that process as well, you've got to wade through bureaucracy and decisions and things to make any sort of movement. But I think people have just got to make a start really and remove the real sort of laborious jobs and bake in their approvals and maybe switch to a more sort of test-based system and make sure the data's in the format they need and evolve naturally.
Yeah, I think there is a real technical hurdle that a lot of businesses will need to get over before they can start using AI properly, and that is just how they structure the data within their business. So using two scenarios, these are two different potential clients we've spoken to over the last couple of years. They both asked me down to sort of give them some advice on using AI to transform their business. One client, I went down there and I said, okay, what CRM do you use? And they said, oh, we don't use CRM. I said, okay, where do you store your invoices and where do you store your client information? They just said, oh, we've just got Word documents and spreadsheets and our email is just in the cloud somewhere. They had no framework. Everything they did was kind of in folders, in documents, and kind of spread out. And there's no systematic, repeatable structure in their data. And the conversation with them was very much, you're not going to be able to do anything with AI until you've got a CRM in place. Once you've got the CRM and your data structured, then you can start to really move things forward and start to automate large swathes of your business. But whilst you're stuck in this world where if you want to send an email to a client about something, you need to dig into that client folder and open 6 different documents and compile something. Like you're not going to get very far. Client B, I went down there and they showed me a very well organized CRM. They did have data stored in SharePoint, but every folder was properly named with the client ID, and every folder had the same structure underneath, and they would take every single email and file it away properly. And they were absolutely meticulous with how they structured the data within their business. And with them, I said, well, actually, straight away, there's 10 things you can do right now that's going to allow you to just massively increase the output of your business. We can just get rid of this roadblock and this roadblock and this roadblock. And those staff that are manually doing this and this and this can then work on other things, and you can take on like 30% more work. So getting your business in order is really important. At Indulge, for example, we've got a support ticketing system. We've got a kind of scheduling system. We've got a billing system. Data is stored in a structured way across all 3 of these systems. And because we've got a support ticket system, we can use AI to read our support tickets and do things with them. Close tickets that are complete, some resurface aging tickets. We can hook a ticket into Claude Code, and then Claude Code can come up with a solution. And that's because we have a ticketing system. If we just had like a shared mail inbox, it would kind of be impossible to do that. Because we've got a billing system, and we've got a system where we log our time, we can use AI to interrogate those and produce reports and crunch data and do all sorts of cool stuff with it. And that's because we've got a solid technical stack, and we've got our data organized in a solid way that allows us to really accelerate forward. And the firms that don't have that stack are just going to be left in the what's the term I'm looking for? Left in the weeds.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I might be overly optimistic here, but in company A, which was quite unorganized, and they'd find it quite difficult to use AI because of the lack of structure, could there be a first step where AI organizes that chaos? Because I think I've seen, some of the I think a demo that you did recently, Pat, where you used Claude to organize a really disorganized folder structure within a client folder, where it just literally just crunched away. It sorted everything neatly into folders. It sorted out all the file names. Perhaps those companies, instead of it being far out of reach for them, perhaps the first step is just get AI to get everything into the right systems, change systems, move everything, organize it perfectly. So then it has that organized structure to work from. Is that a solution for company A is the first step?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So that sort of change project where you're migrating from a horribly unstructured set of shared folders and drives and documents into a CRM, a couple of years ago would have been a very significant project if you're a medium business. But actually AI can really accelerate the whole process for sure. So it can go through client by client, reorganize all that content, surface it into a sort of report so that you can check and sign off that client's revised structure, and then it can save that into a CRM. So that migration from unstructured to structured can definitely be accelerated using AI.
It's I don't know if it's fully related, but we were in a meeting this morning, and Alistair, you were talking about something interesting where it sounds like in using, I think it was specific to Claude, you're preparing a lot of markdown documents that there are basically instructions for Claude. Like you're setting guardrails for how it works so that you're almost putting it in a box so you know exactly how far it can go with things. I imagine that's going to be quite a big thing for firms to sort of set those guardrails.
Yeah, so it's something I've been doing for a couple of reasons. So one is to try and create a sort of memory for Claude as I'm continuing to work on a project. So that allows me to work more efficiently. It avoids me repeating things that are slightly different and interpreting them the wrong way. And, sort of the beauty of all this is there are configurations that you could do in Claude, and you give things a certain file name and you put it in the right place. But it's not particularly technical. You just write the document, and it just means that Claude reviews it every time to sort of remind itself of where it's going. And so I've been creating range of documents to, give it an overview of what I'm working on, tell it to update that document after it's done a feature. And yeah, you can do a lot of things. So you could do things that that tell Claude to always confirm everything with you, or don't make assumptions and ask clarifying questions. You can do things like always refer back to the original documents to stop it drifting. So one of the things it might do is it's sort of a bit like Chinese whispers. It sort of slightly misinterprets at every step, and before you know, it's built something that's not quite right. And then, sort of getting a bit technical, but the other main reason for me is Claude operates on a context window, and once it sort of starts to run out of context, it's less performant. So if you can break every task down, and actually, while Claude can't tell you how much context it's got, it can give you an idea of whether what you're about to build will or won't exceed it. You can sort of try and use the little slice of Claude where it's at its best, do the feature and move on. So yeah, there's lots of things you could do. And like I say, the beauty of it is there is not really any sort of learning curve beyond a few hours of reading up on the documentation and trying a few things out. You don't need to know any programming languages or have any great insight. And in fact, there's not even that much out there about it, because everybody's sort of trying this stuff for the first time and seeing what works. So it's just a way of making it work for you. And you can roll it out across the team as well to try and standardize how other people work.
Is it like the film Memento, where the guy has no long-term memory and so takes Polaroid pictures and writes post-it notes so that every time he does something, he kind of knows where to start again?
Yeah, it basically is exactly that, yeah.
And I've got Claude prompts tattooed all over my entire body.
So ultimately, I think we've sort of answered the question, haven't we? The data is the most important thing to start with. You've got to have good data to be able to use the AI appropriately. And as Russ said, it can be that AI can do that for you. Perhaps, but again, I'm sure this is something that we're going to discuss more in coming episodes. So for now, shall we play some jargon busters? Alistair, let me explain it to you. So I've got a list of industry terms, and every week I put the team, I challenge them to see if they know what it is. So today's term is whale. Does anyone know what this means?
Big fish.
Yeah.
An investor that invests a huge amount of money, or in the context of investment, someone who invests a huge amount of money. In the context of fraud, it's a victim that has a huge amount of money to be defrauded of. I guess so. There's a kind of a two different versions of it.
That's what you're going for. Has anyone got any other thoughts?
Is it based on consuming a large amount of small things? So like a whale eats plankton, something big that just I don't know, makes lots of small investments as its portfolio, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have I genuinely wouldn't have any idea, but I'm noticing a trend for animals being used in a lot of these. I'm also aware of like bear and bull and hawk. These are all kind of used in finance.
Yeah.
So something big. Whales are big, so it's got to be big.
Yeah. I'm thinking it might be against doing investment, which has been the last few. Is it when like a big institution or something like pulls out of a stock and they're the whale, and then it just like plummets in price? Either that, or it's the actual overall value of a big company, and that becomes like a whale, like it's a big whale in the ocean or the other.
Like you're going, I like to see where you're
companies.
going with that. So the term whale means an individual or entity that holds a massive amount of specific cryptocurrency or stock.
I think you were there, weren't we? Largely there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part.
So we've had whale, we've had unicorn. We will see what we come up with next week. And speaking of next week's episode, we're going to be discussing whether there's such a thing as good friction within a system. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I kind of posed this one in. It's probably a UI, like a user interface thing, because if AI is speeding things up, sometimes you actually want the system to slow you down a bit because you don't want to make a decision too quickly. So it's probably one that we'll speak to Russ about in terms of, can you add friction into a system easily, and is it a good thing?
Yeah, it's interesting because friction, well, in the view of consumer duty, is probably something to avoid. It's, they call it sludge. It's something like which isn't a good user experience, but actually, I think the example of quickly moving your money from one pension, quickly moving your money within a pension pot to kind of different investments, for example, you need to be quite careful about how you're moving that. You certainly wouldn't want your kind of your client to be quickly moving their pension pot around when they're not really sure what they're doing. Another example would be someone working internally at a regulated firm, perhaps administrating a trust, for example. You wouldn't want them to be able to quickly make a big payment of £1 million when there's lots of red tape, around AML, for example, where you'd have to follow certain processes. You certainly wouldn't want that quickly automated and not meet the regulatory requirements. So yeah, friction. Although AI can speed up processes, that friction's important at certain steps with those two examples. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation, I think, because user experience needs to be smooth, but at what point is friction a good thing?
So looking forward to getting more into that conversation next week. Everybody, thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Before we go, it's time for a quick shameless plug. This episode was brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services sector. If you're looking for an agency that can specialize in UX and design, production, and marketing, then look no further. To find out more, visit indulge.digital. Thanks for listening.